Hello and welcome back to the Shadow Work Library. I'm back. Welcome back to me. It's been a while, I know. So, one of the things that's always been important to me with this show is something like objectivity, but not quite. I don't think there's anything very real about objectivity, at least not coming from a human. But I did go to school for journalism a million years ago, and even though what we were taught to be objective, sure, it was in stark contrast to the actual nature of mass media. Um, it's something that I strive to do, especially in this realm of exploring what it means to be human in an incredibly fast, incredibly exciting, very uncertain time. So, yeah, I've just recently crawled out of my cave, rather a boat. It's a long story, but the short version is I've been experiencing life. And in doing so, it was kind of hard to keep the show going. I have this thing about me where I really feel the need to share what's on my heart, especially if it's contextual to the message. And usually it is because I don't know if I'm really able to create earnestly if the message isn't contextual to what's going on in my life. And with that can come oversharing, especially if I'm still in my process. And if there are other people involved too, it just really isn't a very appropriate way to do things, at least not in the way that I like to do things. So, okay, I'm already making it about me. But I will say, just for any of you that have been curious what's going on, I'm on the other side of it and starting fresh. I hesitate to say I'm starting fresh because there's a lot of wisdom in this reorientation to my expectations of my life. And I'm a patinaed woman, and it actually feels really great, really, really great. I'm feeling particularly beautiful as this new patinaed sheen is coating my body. So in saying that, there is a lot going on in society right now, the not so beautiful stuff. And I just felt like, hey, it's a really good time for, the Shadow Work Library to get her butt back online. So if you're new here, I'm Jessica DePazzi, and this is the Shadow Work Library. And yeah, let's dive into it. So we've got some things going on here, right? Right now, we're watching authority really tighten in very specific ways. In Iran, we're experiencing, they're experiencing these ongoing protests sparked by the death of Mahsa Amini. And, it's continuing to expose how religious institutions, when they fuse with state power, can override individual conscience and bodily autonomy. And I say can, right? Like, this is an institutional question, not a religious one for me exactly. Here in the US, we're actively in these ICE enforcement operations, especially in Minnesota. And so we're looking at how fear is managed through hierarchy, containment, and again, this control of bodies, this control of movement. I have dear friends on the ground there, and they say that it is, in fact, insane. And I think that matters. The news gives us what pays them well. So I like when I have some firsthand perspective, even though, sure, everyone's perspective is limited in its own way, but it's helpful to know what's going on in the streets. And if we look at France, we have these sustained demonstrations against pension reforms. I think we were experiencing something like that in Greece last time I was there, which, wow, it was a long time ago. And that kind of resistance is reflecting the public's resistance to centralized decisions that feel tone deaf. They're like totally disconnected from a lived reality. So a lot of this that I want to talk about today is about lived reality, the really real. If we sort of distance ourselves from what feels too big for us. It's the same terrain that I'm exploring in this little film that we're creating called Pilgrimage Unknown, working title there, with our dear friend Matthew McCartney, how institutions that were built to provide meaning and order or even salvation can, when under pressure, become these sources of harm, and how people are like pushed to reclaim their inner authority inside these systems that feel impossibly large. And yeah, so what I want to talk about today are these lived signals of what happens when fear organizes belief and power, And we are left to find ourselves again within that system. So in like reactivating the shadow work library and even just reactivating my life in a different kind of way, I've really been asking myself, what do I do well? What is my role here? People have different roles. Some people stand at the front, some are pushing in from the edges, some are holding the line. I'm not really one of those people. If you're listening to this, you might be someone like me who's interested in what's moving maybe underneath, like a little bit of a detached experience of things. And I think actually let's explore those, because in an effort to be more of who we are, which is another aim of what I think I'm here on this planet to do, definitions help. I love an etymology moment, and that goes into, defining what we're even talking about. So when I say some people stand at the front, these are our visible leaders. They speak, they organize, they represent, they are confronting, and the role is to draw attention, to name what's happening out loud, to absorb impact. It's such a courageous place to be. I'm not sure if that's me, to have this energy of being really, really seen, and the danger that comes with that, and the delusion sometimes that comes with that. Yeah. Maybe you're one of these people that pushes from the edges and works at the margins. These people are so exciting to me. They introduce novelty into a system and imagine new ways of living. They challenge norms. They create and test alternatives before it's safe or accepted. And then there are people who hold the line. This is kind of like one of those thankless positions of being a human. The ones that create stability. When we're living in constant motion, to hold people through that uncertainty, to keep systems from collapsing entirely is such a big role and an important one. And I think there's one more else in here. Those all feel pretty serious. There is the type of person that brings play and pleasure and joy. Love this person. They remind us what feels alive through humor or beauty or sensuality and creativity. And I think a lot of us are learning to be this person, especially, when things feel kind of like nuts. They regulate the nervous system of the group and keep relationships and movements and cultures from hardening into, seriousness or control. It's such an important kind of person. And then there's that other role. And maybe you're one of these people like me, the ones who look underneath the stuff, they watch the patterns, and not really in the numbers way, because I don't know, I'm just pretty convinced I'm dyslexic or I have some sort of learning disability when it comes to numbers. So, but I'm talking more about the humanities. They notice how fear, power, control, all these things move through people and systems. And I think this is also an interesting kind of person to be. Not the one that exactly leads the charge or resists directly, but maybe helps other people to see what's actually happening. So change can be more conscious, less reactive when appropriate. Reaction is appropriate a lot of the time. But more importantly, less likely to recreate the same dynamics just under a new flavor or a new name. And if you're that kind of person, you might often also ask yourself, how am I like those people? You might be a real skeptic. A skeptic, skeptical of your own skepticism. How are we more alike than we are different? Because we know we can't change anyone but ourselves. And if we're living inside of these systems, are there evolutions we can make within ourselves that quietly ripple out into the meso and the macro from our micro experience? I think so. I like to think about things, and I find it kind of delightful, actually, maybe in a bit of a dark way even, to notice how we're so much like the villains in our lives. One of the frameworks I like to use for this is, it kind of comes from the Gene Keys, but maybe it's a sociological framework, like a fractal framework, a scale invariant framework. And depending on the lens, it's about fractal patterning and human behavior, where what happens in societies happens in groups, and what happens in groups happens inside of us as individuals. So when I ask myself, how can I leave an impact, and how can I, take part in improving society in some way? I think it's by interrupting the pattern where we actually have access. If the same dynamic lives in systems, that lives in groups, that lives inside of us, then any real shift has to start at the smallest scale, because it's the only place we can reliably intervene, right? Look, even if you're a diplomat or you have major influence, you can even say all of the right words, but if you're not foundationally aligned in your words, if you're not experiencing inner and outer coherence, your words are going to be distorted. And I'm talking about myself here too, by the way. I had someone reach out to me, a listener who gave me some gentle but tough to hear feedback that I was being performative. Like, she was so nice about it. And because I'm talking about shadow work, of course, I'm an open channel for feedback like that. Otherwise, that would be absolutely insane and narcissistic of me not to. And I think she gave me that feedback when I started the YouTube version of the show. Yeah, dude, I was. It was embarrassing to hear that I was being performative, because I was really trying to feel into the transmission and to not feel like the vain version of myself. Yeah, on the screen, right? So it was not surprising because I know how this works. But yeah, it hurt my pride a little bit. And maybe that's why I'm back to audio. There's no YouTube version of this right now. I'm too distracted by how I look. Oh my God. Anyway, see, I just cannot overshare. So this is what I think are facts. When one person loosens their grip on fear, it's going to change how they show up in relationships. That's a fact. I'm pretty sure that's a fact. When enough relationships change, then cultures shift. And when cultures shift, eventually, systems follow. It's slow, it's unfair, but it's real, right? Alrighty, so let's get to the shadow of dominance. At its largest scale, it's playing out in the world around us. We just mentioned those things, like in institutions, governments, belief systems that are under pressure. We have institutional distrust on a massive scale right now. For better or for worse, I don't know what side of history we're on. It seems like fine in some way. But anyway, this really isn't about my personal opinion. If we go one level closer, it's going to show up in the middle space. Our workspaces, our businesses, our relationships, our families, where fear and power become more personal. And at the smallest scale, it's going to show up inside of us in how we respond when things feel overwhelming or uncertain. And it's the same pattern, just moving through different layers. And so if that's true, it means that the work isn't only out there, it's also right here. So yeah, that's the point of the show for anybody who's new. So in the gene keys, dominance, this is gene key 45 in the I Ching, hexagram 45 in human design, it's gate 45, 45 everywhere. Dominance is not simply about power or leadership. It's about more about how authority is held when fear is present. So authority is not a bad thing. Leadership is obviously great. Power can be very useful, but it's what is the flavor of that authority, of that hierarchy when fear is its driving force? And at the shadow frequency, the gene key, the 45th gene key expresses as this need to control resources. This can be information, it can be our finances, attention, and it's at its most primal level, it's about food, fuel, land. It can also express as centralized authority that overrides collective intelligence. We can see this as leadership rooted in fear of loss rather than service. So really at its core, dominance is talking about, if I don't control this, everything will fall apart. So there's nothing wrong with that. That is a thought that I have a lot, so I'm not saying this is an evil place to be. But before I get into the root cause of this, its evolutionary force, I want to talk a little bit about its expressions in that reactive and repressive sense. So in every show I go through, how this might show up for us individually. A lot of us, most of us, will fall on one side of this spectrum of reactive or repressive, meaning when we feel fear, are we repressive, where our fears turn inward and you feel shame and guilt, something's your fault, Or is it expressed outward in the reactive manner as anger, manipulation? You get the thing. So if we talk about this first version of a reactive sort of dominance, this is the kind of energy we recognize right away. It's visible, it's forceful. It's someone taking charge because they don't trust anyone else to do it. So decisions get centralized. The rules are tightening, and people, like, this could be, citizens, it could be your family members, it could be your lover. They're told what's best for them. And there's usually a lot of certainty and very little listening. And underneath all of that is the same thing, that core belief that I just mentioned. If I don't control this, it's going to fall apart. So reactive dominance, it's like often under the guise of being really strong and thinks it's being responsible, but it's actually just responding to threat and not wisdom. And that matters. And then there's this repressive side of dominance, which is, according to Rudd, being timid. It's quieter, but often, like a lot of the repressive forms of these shadows, it can be even more insidious because it doesn't look like power at all. It looks like compliance. It looks like people not speaking up, like someone shrinking to someone else so they can stay comfortable, right? Like no one's barking orders. It kind of looks like victimization. It can look like victim blaming, what I'm talking about here, but that's really not what I'm trying to do. Control happens through these subtle cues, through approval, being a yes person, through people pleasing, through withdrawal, this unspoken understanding of what's allowed and what isn't, and just following that. So in the repressive form of dominance, this sense of authority is still centralized, but it's enforced from the inside, right? Like you're policing yourself. And the fear here is just as strong, even if it's less obvious than the reactive form. It's like, if I take up space, something is going to be taken from me. And so it's really easy to assign the victim and the villain here, but these two are really partners. Reactive dominance needs the repressive to function. Control only really works when somebody else agrees, consciously or unconsciously, to go along with it. And repressive dominance often develops because pushing back once felt too costly. And sometimes it is costly. Like, I don't want to diminish the actual dangers of revolution or, leaving an abusive situation. That's actually, like, I really hope I'm not doing that. What I'm hoping to get at is when we're talking about the 45th gene key in the shadow format, we're looking at this dynamic where we participate in different ways depending on where we're standing and how safe we feel. Sometimes we dominate, sometimes we disappear. And if we're paying attention, we start to notice the moment right before either of those kicks in. And that's a very special kind of awareness to develop. That's real skill development, My girl, Joanna Riggle, she's this executive coach for Next Level Performance. And she has a keynote on presence and awareness as a skill set. And I think that's right on. The biggest thing to remember about the definition of dominance is that it's what happens when fear organizes a system. And there is skill development that we can create, like a certain kind of awareness, that would be really helpful for us. All right, so let's get into some of the fun stuff. I really like the root cause of all of these shadows. I subscribe to the theory that all of our shadows have an evolutionary purpose. This one is no different. Like, this isn't just evil that we're working with. I know it can seem like that sometimes, but the root of dominance is perceived survival threat under uncertainty. So it shows up when something really essential feels unstable and no one knows what's going to happen next. And we're like not set up to ask philosophical questions in those moments. Most of our nervous systems are just trying to figure out how to make tomorrow predictable. One of the thinkers who I really like is Robert Sapolsky. He is a primatologist, a neuroscientist, and he spent like all these cool guys, like decades studying how stress and hierarchy shape behavior in baboons and in humans. And so he wrote that big book, Behave, which was great. And most recently he wrote Determined, which I did not read. But I did reach out to him, like a little fun fact, in 2021 to be in the Dark Night of the Soul documentary. And I got a really fun, like, not right now email from him that I dug up. I have it right here. He said, I'm ensconced in book writing and ruminating on how much of a mess the world is in. So I'm not available for any interviews at the time. It's like, damn, I like this guy. Anyway, in the big book of Behave, he explains that dominance isn't really about who someone is as much as it is about the conditions that they're in, right? Like, this is kind of all we've been talking about. But when resources feel uncertain, then hierarchies can really harden. And when stress rises, controlling behavior really starts to increase. And on the flip side of that, when survival feels more predictable and thriving feels possible or probable, those same hierarchies soften and the same people behave completely differently depending on how safe the system feels. Historically, the most direct way to create a sense of predictability was food. Who controls food will control continuity. Like, at its most basic sense, calories means you're going to wake up the next morning. It means survival. Being able to farm grain meant we can survive winter in areas where we typically wouldn't be able to. And like, storage of those things meant you're going to hold some power too. So early hierarchies formed around access, around who distributed food, who made the food, who guarded the food, who decided where the food went and how much it costed. And yeah, like, because this uncertainty demanded a kind of structure, which was really helpful for us. Now we can eat bread whenever we want, most of us anyway. Like, that control collapsed fear into something really manageable. This is also where we can start to see what we could call totalitarian farming as logistics. I went into a meandering deep dive on the side effects of totalitarian farming on this podcast I listened to so long ago. I cannot find it. I really wish I could. It was this like super small, obscure show with very bad audio quality, very little podcast production, really none at all, of just some guy in his room. It was so, so good. I wish I could find it. Anyway, totalitarian farming. Yeah. Large scale food systems that only work if everything and everyone stays in line. It's super efficient. It's super impressive. But also like not exactly where you'd go to feel spiritually held. But that's like our world, right? What's important that, and I'm talking a lot about food, it's not really the point. Like, it's a signal. Food is how scarcity first registered in our bodies. If you miss a few meals, like, suddenly you're not that interested in democracy anymore, right? Like, if I miss a few meals, I'm shutting down and it's just hamburger in my head. Okay, so as society has evolved, that signal abstracted. So like, today, food has become money. It's become employment, housing, healthcare, legal status, attention, education, even meaning. We're still worried about if we're going to survive the winter. It just looks like rent now. So when we see dominance today, things like centralized authority, control over bodies or narratives, this is a very old biological pattern that's responding to modern uncertainty. And the result is all these fiddly weird little laws and things that are happening, and some big and some kind of we can't be ignoring so much anymore. But I guess at the root of it, our brains, all of ours, don't really care whether the threat is hunger or homelessness or irrelevance. The threat of irrelevance, that's a good one. It just reads instability and it reaches for control. It's like grasping. And I understand this. I'm at a point in my life where historical Jessica, previous Jessica, would be grasping for some certainty. But dude, do this kind of stuff long enough and that's not the way. Okay, let's move on. I really like this kind of work because it's like, once we see that, that we're not looking at power itself, we're looking at power gripping too tightly because it's afraid of losing access to what keeps life going. Once we see that, a lot of what's happening right now stops feeling random. And I think that's helpful. It's helpful to extract a little bit of order out of this chaos. When systems are feeling unstable, control almost always collapses down to the same levers: bodies, movement, access. Who can move, who can stay, who gets care and resources, who doesn't. And again, I'm going to go back to Sapolsky here. He explains that at a societal level, this looks like reduced empathy, increased aggression, a stronger pull towards in-groups and more rigid enforcement of rank. And like this idea that what we're dealing with maybe are just a few bad actors at the top, that if we could just remove the wrong leaders and replace them with the right people, everything would settle down. I don't know. Like, yeah, again, I'm not a poli-sci person and I don't know shit about economics, but I'm pretty sure that's not how it works. Like, yeah, I think if I ran the country, there would be complete economic destruction by Thursday, and somehow we'd still be dealing with the same power dynamics by Friday. Because behavior is layered, right? It's shaped by biology, yes. Like there's things you're just born into, but also by history and culture and our environment. And when those layers are under the same kind of stress, systems tend to reproduce the same outcomes, no matter who's in charge. And I think that's like an uncomfortable thing to consider, that under enough pressure, most of us are going to behave in surprisingly similar ways. We only have so many survival responses available to us. And yeah, I mean, that has me thinking of the spectacle. Is that relevant? Guy Debord, the French philosopher, he talked about the spectacle, that idea that we get pulled into watching personalities and outrage and scandals and performances while the underlying structure stays exactly the same. So when we focus only on individuals and we stay distracted by the spectacle of who's winning or who's losing at the top, we kind of miss the deeper pattern, right? It's like somebody's hand is like, oh, look over here, the illusion of the magician. I mean, personally, I don't think that there's a they, but there is a collective they. I don't know if that makes sense. And then we're shocked every single time when the same dynamics reappear under a different name, under a different leader, underneath a different flag. And like then when it's our own flag, doesn't that feel so bad? At the end of the day, the people that are quote unquote on the top are just people who are trying not to lose their jobs. And so, yeah, I think that's a good segue into bringing it a little bit closer to home. Dominance is easy to see at the levels of institutions, but we also see it in our families and friendships and workplaces. Maybe it's lower stakes, maybe, but it's a similar pattern. At the family level or the workplace level, dominance sometimes looks like tyranny. But most of the time, I think it looks like control of responsibility. One person managing everything, one person who decides the things, one person is in charge of the emotional weather. And things like food, money, time, information, these can become leverage unconsciously, I think. Yeah. So we can hear things like, if I don't handle this, it's just going to fall apart. The same thing that sort of fuels dominance on its higher levels as well. I'll just do it myself. It's easier if I just decide. And sometimes they're not wrong, but the question is, what fear is organizing that responsibility? Is it a lack of respect and trust for your partner? This is that reactive form of dominance. Being micromanaging or controlling in the name of stability, in the name of love. And then there's that repressive version of dominance that usually goes hand in hand, that timid one. The person who walks on eggshells, that avoids conflict to keep the peace, suppressing their needs so that the system of the family or the system of the relationship or the workplace stays stable. And again, like in the larger sort of economic sense of, the institutional sense of the public, the internal logic for the individual in these systems is like, if I speak up, something's going to be taken from me. Love, safety, belonging. And yeah, it's an adaptation that mirrors citizens under authoritarian systems or employees under like very rigid management. Is the same for partners in emotionally imbalanced relationships. So yeah, this is where dominance becomes a relationship again, not a villain. I think I'll share a story here. There's a place I like to work in Scottsdale. Oh, I'm in Arizona, by the way. Yeah. Sometimes I feel like such a creep there because I will do like full on investigative journalism as I'm nearing the end of my day. My brain starts to tune out around like 2 o'clock. And I have no problem just staring at people. So I usually sit in the same seat off to the side there's this one chair that has like no direct lighting over it. So it's really nice on the eyes. And yeah, sometimes I like being just far enough away so I can see what's happening and hear what's happening without accidentally being pulled into it, which I feel like is a pretty cool survival skill at this point in my life. And I often see this trope there. It's super common. It'll be two hot women and a guy, less hot. And almost immediately it's clear that these people are not friends. But it's not really a date either. There's like no warmth, no leaning in, no curiosity. No one seems particularly interested in anyone else. It's kind of an arrangement. They're like sitting together, but not really with each other. And yeah, like everyone arrived, they're just already preparing to leave. And the guy is always talking. But he's not really talking to the women exactly. I mean, he is talking to them, but he's really like narrating himself to the room and maybe wondering if people can hear him. And the women are usually on their phones. They'll nod occasionally. A lot of scrolling on the phones. And then another guy shows up late. Like this happens all the time. Casually late. And this is the kind of late that tells me nothing is urgent that is happening here. And, you know, the way he like pulls up the chair without like introducing it, I don't know. It's this funny dynamic. Honestly, I might be making all this up in my head. Totally possible. I don't know these people. But like there's a way that he shows up which answers for me a lot of the like questions of what this whole thing is better than anything else could. And so then the men will start talking to each other. This is like businessy language, something about deals, something about a massive opportunity. It is something very vague though, but delivered to sound very, very important. And the women are sort of drifting away. There's more scrolling, more picking at food that they didn't order, sipping on drinks that they are not going to have to pay for. And look, I know how creepy I sound right now just watching these poor people. I do feel like I'm breaking some unspoken rule of privacy, but then I think between you and I, when someone is so openly a stereotype of themselves, I feel like they're giving me permission to do a study on an entire subculture. I think so, anyway. And I don't say this with the kind of judgment that it might sound like I have. As I'm listening to myself say this, I do sound judgy. I've been at tables like this. I've played versions of this role when I was young and impressionable. I remember my embarrassing attempts to have proximity proximity to certainty or attention, and would mistake that for care or safety. And I would know better, and I'll still do it anyway, you know? So I know this game, it's about positioning, not attraction, really. The women are performing availability and the men are performing relevance, and neither are really interested in the connection. At least it doesn't look like it. And what I'm seeing here is this shadow of dominance. Like everyone is signaling something to someone who isn't even actually there. They're trying to stay close enough to power, to status, or safety to feel included without stepping really into anything that's real. You know, it actually reminds me of going back to the Phoenix Art Museum a couple days ago. I took myself on a date and I was listening to the Rosalia album, which is crazy good. And I walked into the Eric Feischl gallery again, and I really love his stuff. I mean, the actual paintings are kind of ugly, but they're very moving. He likes to paint couples in this one series anyway, of couples who are physically close, but psychologically miles apart in the setting of Americana, right? So yeah, it kind of reminded me of what was happening at the Ambassador, like people who are physically close, but psychologically miles apart. You know, like what are we actually looking at? And I guess kind of like what I was referencing before, it would be easy to say that there are victims and villains here, really depending on how you view gender roles. But I'm pretty sure what I'm watching wasn't coercion or manipulation. It was the shadow of dominance expressed more socially. And yeah, like fear organizing behavior without anyone really like needing to raise their voice. And I share this story because I think it is a good example of how this 45th hexagram can express itself at that meso level, this medium sort of level, through people quietly agreeing to play roles that keep them adjacent to power while they're slowly losing touch with themselves. No one is even doing anything wrong here. But I guess that's the point. It's like nobody is really here. And yeah, I just think that this is what dominance can look like when it's no longer enforced from the top. It's like just negotiated socially. Like there's this unspoken sense that if I disrupt the arrangement, if I name the weirdness, because it's weird, something is going to be lost. Safety, status, comfort, free drinks, even the illusion that this arrangement is going to go somewhere, right? So after all that, I want to like take us from the size of the world back to the size of the human. You know, we have the systems, the tightening, the dominance patterns playing out at every possible scale. Like we are looking at some fractal kind of horror show. But we can very deliberately sort of work with this. I don't actually want to leave us with suspended critique. That can be helpful, but that feels a little bit incomplete here. The world does feel big right now and obnoxiously problematic in some ways. Authority can feel very far away and abstract and somehow annoyed with you specifically, maybe. And if you're one of those people where the problems of the world sometimes feel like they really matter to you, you know, your body might be doing that thing where you're just checking out, or you're numbing, or you're scrolling, or like you're feeling way too much, or you're reaching for snacks. Like, I get it. Naming the weight without trying to resolve it, that's really step one in all this. What we've been talking about, dominance, tightening under pressure, isn't really about bad people doing bad things. It's about stress, pressure compressing systems, right? And if that's true, and I think it is, then the question isn't how do we fix the world? Because honestly, that question alone makes me want to lie face down on the floor for a while. The real question is, where does this pattern live closest to us? Like, what do we even do with that? Because the same force showing up in the institutions is showing up in our families, and that same force in families is showing up in our relationships. And the same force that's showing up in our relationships shows up in a single human being having a very normal, very human reaction to uncertainty. And I think that's so interesting because when we bring the lens all the way in, we start to see that while we may not be in control of the systems or the outcomes or the speed at which anything is changing, we do actively participate in how fear or trust moves through us all the time. I think I'm hearing my friend Dr. Danielle saying maybe not all the time. Okay, honestly, I don't have the qualifications to say that, but we have more participation in that than we might want to admit. At the smallest scale, we're talking about the scale of the nervous system. And dominance shows up in ways we recognize immediately, like the urge to tighten, to take control, to run away from intimacy, to make a decision quickly so that the discomfort stops, to manage everything, everyone, you know, ideally the future as well, before anything has a chance to go sideways. Like if anything's going to go sideways, I'm going to be the one to do it. So like, yeah, we're talking about survival strategies, but what those survival strategies don't do so well is create a real sense of freedom, or what the Gene Keys call, or Richard Rudd calls, the gift of synergy. Because that really lives somewhere else in our psyches and our bodies. Synergy is what happens when force relaxes just enough for our intelligence to redistribute. So it like synergy is not passivity or giving up power. It's not pretending everything's fine, right? Like it's what we do when we start listening. Listening actually turns out to be the most efficient strategy in complex systems, which is deeply annoying if you like being right, but here we are. And this is where I want to make it very personal, because synergy kind of sounds like one of these corporate buzzwords, something that happens inside of a corporation or in some even like hypothetical future society that has, you know, less traffic and less identity politics. But in the way that we're talking about it, it starts inside of ourselves. One of my dear friends, Jules, talks about this in a way that I really, really love. He's someone who has put himself through real crucibles, including the process, the Special Forces experience, which I don't know if I had said this I must not have, because I stopped the show before we had retired the program. But yeah, she has gone back into the earth now. So anyway, Jules, like, yeah, he goes through these crucibles, high intensity, high stakes environments. These are arenas where fear is absolutely like at the front and center. And fear can very easily take the wheel and drive your whole situation straight into a wall. But instead of letting the loudest, most aggressive voice in his head become the boss, he went through one experience of Kokoro where he started to get really curious about all of them. His fear got a voice, his instinct got a voice, his logic got one, his compassion had a seat at the table. And so, yeah, that like really loud internal tyrant that was running the show had to just sit down for a second. He practices a kind of internal leadership that reminds me of how Bob Ross talks to his paintings. It's like, oh, look, you're scared. That makes sense. Let's see what you need, Oh, that brushstroke didn't work out. Let's see what that wants to turn into. Yeah, when we stop shaming ourselves for the parts that are showing up uninvited, like every part of you belongs and everyone participates, and you surround yourself with maybe just the few people that understand your imperfectness and like kind of love it. Yeah, that's a great thing. And unsurprisingly, people who learn to do this internally stop recreating dominance externally. Because when you stop having a dictator in your head, well, at least not one that's so loud, you're far less interested in dominating other people and much less willing to tolerate it when it shows up, when it's disguised as confidence or someone's certainty. So yeah, that's the gift of the 45th gene key, synergy. Synergy is communion. That's acidic state, actually. It's collaboration, coordination. We have no time or space for command, control, and people living at this frequency don't, they're not the ones that are usually storming the gates of power. They're not always loud anyway. They don't always have titles, but they are like radical in that they change the quality of the spaces that they're in. These are the people who build teams where emotional intelligence matters, decision-making intelligence, like all of that moves laterally instead of bottlenecking at the top. It just puts a lot of pressure on the top. They can design systems that adapt without panic. These are the people that like can really figure out how to decentralize authority as basic common sense. So it's not like rebellion always. And these are the people that value rhythm and rest and humor and probably pleasure and humanity, because exhausted people build rigid systems and rigid systems always break eventually. So yeah, when our internal authority can soften, our relationships are going to shift. And I think I had already talked about this, but when relationships shift, so does culture, and so do the systems that follow. Because coherence is simply more stable than control. I think to kind of like close this out, what are you and I here to do in this world? I don't think I'm here to save the world, although sometimes I'll get a pang of a hero complex. But I think it's really about like refusing to harden while living in a world that could use a little saving. So when things feel too big, and they will, we can come back to something smaller and more manageable. The size, the depth, the breadth of our breath, the tone of our inner voice, the way that we speak to ourselves when we don't know what's next, the way that you explain yourself when people want certainty from you. That's a thing. Yeah. And from there, I think, inevitably, without needing your approval, synergy is going to do the rest. That's one of the things I love about the Gene Keys work, is that often a little bit of awareness, a little bit of an etymology moment in the humanities can solve a lot. And then, yeah, we just have things happening in the background of our lives that just show up a little differently. So speaking of, nervous system reset, the size of one's breath, admittedly, I could use a nervous system reset after the adventure I've been on. So I am heading into a 10-day Vipassana, a silent meditation in Central Texas, I'm going to be in noble silence. That's what they call it, for about a week from now when I'm recording this. I'm feeling a little nervous, very underprepared, but I'm also emotionally ready for it. I don't want to research it hardly at all. I just know what my packing list is. I've read a few Reddit threads for hot tips, but I really want to step into that arena without any expectations on what's going to happen, how I'm going to show up, so that on the other side of that, I can feel, just that I had a very authentic kind of experience of myself in a very quiet, maybe disorienting place. I'll let you know how it goes. On the next episode, I'd like to talk about the shadow of mediocrity and the gift of style. Style and taste is something that I've been really diving into the last several years. This is the 8th gene key, the 8th hexagram in the I Ching. But look, if you've been listening to the show for a while, I almost never do the gene key. I think I want to do something else will pop up. So thank you for listening all this time. I got my Spotify for creators wrapped, and I was like shocked to see how many people are still listening to the show, how many hours I have taken up in people's heads. And like I don't take that responsibility lightly. And I also don't want to take this work too seriously. So thank you for holding me accountable and sending me, like some of you send me emails and messages through my Instagram, just, to say hi, thanking me for the show. I think that's so fun. So if you'd like to connect, you can reach me at my new email, jessica@shadowmedia.group. And you can find me on Instagram at jessicadepatsi_. That's DEPATIE. And I guess lastly, if you have a personal brand and you'd like a refresh based on your design, I take on a few one-on-one clients for that kind of work. So love you all, and stay safe but not too safe, and I'll talk to you soon.